Welcome back to Death Wish from 1974, the Reboot video. Enjoying some vacation time. Now we go back to New York City. See a lot about New York City these days online the last year or so. And now we're headed back to New York since that's where they live, and based off of the novel by Brian Garfield and directed by Michael Winner. And now we see Paul Kersey himself at work, played by Charles Bronson, as he speaks to Sam here, played by William Redfield, talking about all the murders happening, and damn, this is just so relatable to today's world.
You know, decent people are going to have to work here and live somewhere else.
By decent people, you mean people who can afford to live somewhere else.
Oh, Christ.
And Paul directs his attention to Henry here about the Jankel development plan in Arizona, and asks Paul how Hawaii was for him and his wife Joanna. And back to talking about the crime in New York City and all the stats about it. And now at the grocery store where we see hoodlums, one of them being played by Jeff Goldblum. And we see Joanna and Carol Kersey right there as well. And so at the checkout, as Joanna wants the groceries to be delivered, and one of the hoodlums sees the address receipt to Paul Kersey's home. And now they just follow the two girls back home, and these guys just run to the back and now knock on the Kersey door.
Who is it?
Groceries, ma'am.
And the three break in, and all they want is money. And now these guys are boiling as Jeff Goldblum is ready to destruct the Kersey home. So Jeff hits Joanna and the big bald guy Carol. And Jeff Goldblum taking his pants off, we'll skip that. And Carol tries to reach for the phone, but too weak to grab it. And back at work, as Paul Kersey wants to get his wife on the phone, instead it's Jack Toby, Carol's husband, played by Stephen Keats, who's Paul Kersey's son-in-law, who calls up to tell him that Joanna and Carol were sent to the hospital. And here he comes rushing, asking Jack where they are, and Officer Joe Charles, here played by Robert Kia Hill, comes in to tell Paul that they were just beat up. And he leaves as Paul is just freaking out now, as Carol told Jack she opened the door thinking it was the grocery delivery boy who was here, and sees a bleeding man. Now here comes a doctor to tell Paul about Joanna and Carol.
My name is Paul Kersey. How's my wife?
I'm sorry. She died a few minutes ago, Mr. Kersey.
So Joanna Kersey is dead, and now for the funeral in the blazing snow as he lets Carol go home with Jack. And now at the police station, as Paul Kersey is here to speak to Officer Joe Charles. And here he comes, and will take Paul to the detective handling his case, and brings him here to the set of Serpico from 1973, the Al Pacino movie, if you've seen that. And the detective here was also in Serpico. And now sits down to tell Paul that security guard from D'Agostino's remembers three weirdos following Joanna and Carol home. And asks about Carol for how she's doing, and she didn't give enough info on any of the three weirdos. And there's just a chance of catching these three. And here comes Jack, horny, but she screams and rolls over as Paul is now watching television thinking about what he could do. And sipping on his milk, he just sees a car being broken into, and that's it for that night. And the next morning, he's at the bank asking for $20 in quarters and puts it into the sock for his own safety. And here comes Sam again. And here comes Henry as well with a blueprint in his hand, as he will let Paul take a vacation to Tucson, Arizona, where he will redesign Jankel development, since you've forgotten Paul Kersey is an architect. A lot of you are used to the Bruce Willis remake. And we'll tell Henry in a week, and he's back at Jack Toby's apartment watching Carol since she's sleeping too much. And Jack tells Paul he's going to take Carol to a psychiatrist and suggests Carol should take a vacation.
It might be better if she didn't have any association with anyone that might remind her of that day.
How the hell do I remind her of that day?
So Paul can't come along, as he now tells Jack he's got to go to Tucson, Arizona, but to make sure he calls Paul up about Carol every other day. So Paul now getting off the bus and says hi to the newspaper vendor here, and turns around, spots this guy smoking, and now uses quarter-filled sock and uses it on this mugger and runs off. And Paul being back at home as he has a drink and happy that his sock weapon works. And now we have landed in Tucson, Arizona, and here to pick up Paul Kersey is Ames Jankel himself, played by Stuart Margolin. And he can easily tell Paul's from New York City. Takes Paul to the area where the necessary redesigning has to happen, now to the fictional town where it's really a movie set just to watch a performance. And now it's time for beer and design time, as Ames just wants the architect plan to start already. And now it's nighttime with Paul Kersey getting the blueprint ready as Ames walks in now to check. And he'd like to take Paul Kersey to a gun club to shoot guns, and brings Paul here, now tells Ames he was in the Korean War as a conscientious objector, and tells him New Yorkers aren't allowed guns. And now it's shooting time, and Paul says he hasn't held a gun in a long time. and the architect plan is ready as Ames is ready to buy the redesign. And Paul Kersey is being dropped off at the airport, and Ames is gifting Paul a present and helps him inside the airport.
I want you to know if you ever get tired of living in that toilet, you're welcome here.
And back in New York, as Jack is here to pick up Paul Kersey, and he just wants to know how Carol is since he lied on the phone about Carol feeling better, and she can't be saved. And he goes to see her at the hospital and tells Paul, and Jack tells Paul that Joanna and Carol are part of the crime stats of New York now and can't do anything about it. And Paul Kersey is made it home and sees his Hawaii vacation pictures have been developed and thinks of Joanna Kersey, who's played by Hope Lang, by the way. And opens up his luggage, remembers a present Ames Janchel gave him, and opens it up to see it's a gun. And he just walks into the night and goes into the park and already spots somebody following Paul Kersey from up there. Here he comes asking for money.
Give me your money or I'll bust you up.
And runs away Paul Kersey back home and just vomits in the toilet. He just throws up. The next morning we do meet the main cop of the movie, Detective Frank Ochoa, played by Vincent Gardenia, as the detective from earlier is back to show him the corpse, the guy that Paul shot, who was actually on parole, that mugger. He was just shot, not robbed, okay? And back at the office with Paul Kersey looking at the gun case and stores it in the safe, and here comes Henry and Sam again to see how well Paul did in Tucson, Arizona. And now for the next scene where we see a guy getting mugged, and it's Paul's first crime-stopping attempt. And even shoots Denzel Washington here. Now Detective Frank Ochoa is back to question the guy who got mugged, as Ochoa's colleague Hank here, played by Jack Wallace, questions him. And no, that wasn't Denzel Washington, it's just a joke.
You saw him pretty good, didn't you? Yeah, for the shit.
Next scene, a mental rehab church, dropping Carol off since her condition has gotten worse. And back here talking about living in the country than in the city since they would be at peace. And now talking about pioneers, and back at the police station with Frank Ochoa announcing how to find the guy who killed the muggers professionally, make sure he's a combat veteran, that he has a result, and that he was a result of muggers entering his house. And now for the next scene as Paul Kersey rides the New York City subway peacefully. Pelham 123 also came out this year in 1974, and now check that movie out. And now for the muggers to be killed. And he just runs out the subway with these cops just wondering where the shooter went, and now on TV it's Police Commissioner Dreyer here, played by Stephen Elliott, is giving out input with the headlines, dubbing the shooter as the vigilante, and you got Italian, German, and French news people also reporting about this too, as Paul and his colleagues are all enjoying it while eating dinner.
Commissioner, it's rumored that the rate of street muggings has dropped since the vigilante became headline news. Is that true?
Not true.
What a liar. Ha 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 ha. What a damn liar. And back at the station as Ochoa answers the phone and speaks with his colleague Hank about not finding any prints on the vigilante's groceries, but do see the receipt, and he sees it's D'Agostino's, and to make sure to find anyone who lives near D'Agostino's who was affected by any recent crime. Now Jack is at Paul's apartment and he sees he's playing loud music, asking him if he wants any liver, and he's just pissed off, maybe from vigilante guilt. Next scene, Paul's at a restaurant and sees a police van driving by.
Hey, there goes the pussy posse.
And taking the cash out really attracted these two guys as Paul heads down to the subway station. Here comes John Shaft and his buddy.
You'll have to take it.
So Shaft actually ran away as Paul got stabbed on the shoulder, which he'll treat it at home, and the goofy cop just goes to find Paul, but escapes again. Yeah, he missed it right on time. And he's made it back home and treats the cut on his shoulder, just like Bruce Willis does in the remake, which he recreates. So next scene at forensics, Ochoa and Hank are asking the cop that he did take the statement from Shaft, and sees that John Shaft and his buddy have been both shot by the same gun, as the doctor brings out the bullets. Caliber bullets that the mugger in the park was shot by Paul. And back at home as Paul Kersey is back reading the newspaper and watching the news on TV and sees that John Shaft and his pal are both identified and have long criminal histories. And now the communal portion of the news, and Paul slapping the Vigilante Illustrated magazine on a side table, and back at the station as the officer here reads out the stats of where the Vigilante could be associated with any one of the 14 families that do live near D'Agostino's and affected by the crime. And Frank wants this done today. The next scene, Paul is at a company party and this woman spewing out some of her own conversation about equality amongst muggers and Paul enjoying the view of New York on the balcony. And Frank Ochoa and Hank have investigated the very 14 families that were on the list. And now the next one on the list is Paul Kersey. I have all the info on him, and Hank mentioning Officer Joe Charles was the one helping out Paul earlier. And here he is asking some more questions. And Hank will follow Paul while Ochoa and the locksmith will look inside Paul's apartment. What a weird way of following. So Frank didn't really find anything after looking everywhere and has now made it back to the station to meet with the district attorney. And the blood cottons Ochoa found at Paul's matches with the blood from the knife that was used on Paul by John Shaft. And the commissioner is questioning this since the DA pulls out the info that mugging has gone down since Paul Kersey showed up as a vigilante. So Frank is now assigned to scare off Paul Kersey, and Paul Kersey at the office late at night doing some designs, and the secretary puts him through a call from a supposed old friend.
Scare them off.
So threatening phone call, and now there's fancy music playing as he puts the gun back into the safe and leaves a bus to get back home. And here comes Ochoa and Hank again to spy on Paul Kersey, and the cops are here. You know, they were waiting for Paul to show up and this is all part of the scaring him off plan. And Hank and Ochoa are already in place waiting for Paul Kersey to make his vigilante move as Paul leaves from the back door. And Ochoa tells Hank to call up Paul's apartment from the phone booth. So far, an out-of-order phone booth, and Paul knowing Ochoa was the one who called him earlier as he looks around first, before he goes on his vigilante missions. And Hank calls from the subway payphone and Paul isn't at home, and runs back to tell Ochoa, so he drives around as Paul has made it back to his workplace to pick up his gun. And Frank Ochoa knows he's going to come here as a security guard tells him Paul Kersey just left. And Paul Kersey leaving out the subway station and gives the billboard there a glance and sees his headlines are there. And Ochoa comes back to see Hank, and that's it. And here comes more muggers in the same park. And shoots both muggers, and the third one who has a gun shoots Paul Kersey and makes his escape. And Paul chases him down as Ochoa now gets an update about the shooting from his radio slang, and both Paul and the mugger have made it to the factory area. He thinks he's back in one of his westerns, but he falls back and the mugger runs away. And here comes Frank Ochoa, wants to see the patrolman who found Paul Kersey and goes to see him, and he's the one that gave him the update. And gives Ochoa Paul Kersey's gun and will make sure no one will try to arrest or question the vigilante. And now at the hospital, as Frank Ochoa is here to see the famous Paul Kersey and talks to him and tells him alone he will drop his gun in the river, his present, and will have him transfer offices to another city for his job. And wants him to get out of New York City permanently and going out with the press in the way, making up the vigilantes still out there in New York. Now we're in Chicago, Illinois, as we see Paul Kersey as he meets up with the real estate agent here. Sees a girl needing help. And that's Death Wish from 1974. Great movie. Check it out. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Check out my Death Wish 2018 video I've done recently. Like, comment, and subscribe, and share this video for all you Death Wish fans and Charles Bronson fans. And I'll see you next time. And make sure to check the movie out. Like I said, take care.